Hi, Yuxin, and welcome along to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you here. So, would you want to start by introducing yourself to the audience? Tell us a little bit about Replo and how it came to be.
Yeah, so my name is Yuxin. I'm one of the co-founders of Replo. So Replo is a platform that helps you build super high performance, like beautiful on-brand landing pages on Shopify. So we're growing super quickly. We're a Shopify app right now, but we're backed by Figma. We're backed by the investors from PayPal and a bunch of other investors as well. And we've been onboarding like hundreds of brands every single week to build landing pages. We're used by brands like Hexclad and Caraway and like Fly by Jing and all of brands that we love and I have in my house. So it's been really exciting working with these brands, improve conversion, help them with design, help them with getting, development out on Shopify.
Awesome. Yeah, when I came across you guys through a network that we're in together, I showed my team and they instantly got so excited. I mentor a bunch of e-com founders and they loved it straight away. So it's clear that there's a bit of a game change happening here with what you guys are doing. So congrats on that, because it's pretty new, right? You only founded in the last year or two?
Yeah, last year and a half actually, but it's been such a wild journey that it feels like longer.
Yeah, awesome. So should we dig in? And I'd love for you to tell, well, it would be good to hear like how you came to be first and foremost, and then we can chat more about some of the tips and ideas you have for our audience on how they can improve performance with better landing pages and conversion rate optimization.
Yeah, totally. So I know my co-founder from college, actually. So we both went to Berkeley together, studied computer science there, and been working together for like almost 12, 13 years at this point. And my background's in design and software engineering. So I used to be an engineering manager at Uber, ran a couple of engineering teams there. And design and product was always really, really important to me. Like I have been using Figma since it came out. I've been doing design for the last 10 years. And so a friend and I actually ran a Shopify store for a while just for fun. This was kind of on the side. And like even coming from 15 years of development background, I was like, oh my god, it's so hard to build on Shopify. Like outside of just kind of like the random drop shipping businesses, it's like if I wanted to actually create a cohesive brand, I wanted to actually update my Shopify store. It's just really, really difficult, and I just didn't really have time to go in and be like, oh, let me go out and hire like a bunch of developers to do it, right? And also I kind of felt bad because I was a developer and it was still really hard for me. So I looked at all the apps out there and they didn't really kind of meet what I was looking for, which was really a lot of design flexibility, really a lot of templates that could really help me get started, like templates that looked really, really good. So that's when I was kind of like, okay, well, there's kind of like a gap in this market where I think we can make a big impact. I think we can build a really, really great product. Yeah. And that's kind of where things kind of started like a year and a half ago. And, I know Noah from college. We were really, really good friends. And I was like, hey, you want to work on this thing? And he was like, yeah, this sounds pretty cool. Let's do it. So that's kind of when we got the ball rolling and everything kind of started from there.
That's awesome. Okay, so for our audience, what tips do you have on how they can, because, landing pages are kind of a bit of a hot topic at the moment. The standard e-com funnel that, worked for years and years, it was sending people from an ad straight to a product page. But I think with the increasing competition, with, ad costs rising, brands have got more innovative and started employing kind of landing page strategies. Yeah. But what does that mean? What does that mean for brands, and why do you think it's so important to have a landing page versus just sending people to the product page? And what are some best practices?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think there's always kind of a hot topic of the month in e-commerce, right? And I think we meet a lot of merchants. We probably meet with over 100 merchants every week, and they're like, hey, I heard about landing pages from X and Y, and I know I have to get into it, but I'm not really sure how to get started. And I think people make it a little bit more complicated than it is, right? I think the thing in e-commerce is you're kind of trying to pitch your story, your brand, your products on the internet where you've never met someone in person before, right? So you kind of have to tell this really compelling story, and that story is not just at the ad or the creative or the email. It's an end-to-end story, right? And the way I kind of imagine it is kind of like a funnel where someone clicks on your ad or someone sees your ad, they click into a page. and you have to like keep their attention for like the next, 2 minutes while they're like checking out, or, maybe you have a different goal where you want to like have some impressions and they might come back later, but there's a certain kind of goal and there's a certain story that you need to tell. And then landing pages is kind of a part of that story. And I think if you think about it from that point of view, I think it's like everything else kind of falls really naturally into it, right? So your page needs to have a very high level of trust, because if someone comes onto your page and the page looks nothing like what they saw in the ad, or it's like selling a totally different product, people are just like, what the hell is this? Like, I'm just going to leave. Right. So, and then you've paid like, money on this ad, if you're paying per click, like it's like you spent money on this ad, you've already spent so much work trying to get people onto your site, and then they just leave within the first 5 seconds. Right. So I think like trust, like having great design, being on brand, really having a messaging that connects. It's like if you're telling a story to someone, you don't have like a hook at the beginning and then you're like telling a different story. It's like the story has to be cohesive. So the landing page has to connect to, the ad content, and then that has to connect with the rest of your site. And then all those things kind of like fall naturally if you're kind of thinking about like, hey, I'm trying to convince someone to buy this product, right? And then the last thing is like instrumentation, right? It's like the way I think about selling stuff on the internet is like you're basically doing the sales pitch like 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000 times. And what's really important is like one thing that I always thought was really interesting is like stand-up comedians kind of like record like, each of their performances. And it's like, okay, that's actually really interesting, because like how I think about, landing pages is kind of like you're telling the story, but you're also doing an experiment on like, okay, who's actually interested in the story? How many times how long are people staying into the story, right? And like the longer you can get people to stay, the more people are going to end up at the end of the story, which is when they buy the product. So I think like analytics, staying on brand, trust, like all of these things are super, super important.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, humans just naturally, we're wired for stories, aren't we? And we're making decisions about products, not necessarily rationally, but because it kind of ignites an emotion or a sense of connection or a sense of belonging, being part of a tribe, that kind of thing. How much are you, because you mentioned like kind of congruence with the ad, how much are your users using landing pages to kind of have a segmented strategy? So an ad that appeals to, the busy working mom versus an ad that appeals to the stay-at-home mom being sent to a different landing page based on the ad that they came from. Is that something that people are doing a lot of these days?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's kind of the best way to run ads and landing pages, right? Like when I was at Uber, like we had a $1 billion marketing budget. So like for us, like when at that company, it was like, okay, well, there's, 800 different cities that you're operating in. In each of these cities, you have a different product. And in each of these products, it has to speak to someone, right? And on a $1 billion marketing budget, you can have hundreds of thousands of landing pages. And for it, like it totally works out because you have a $1 billion marketing budget, right? Yeah. So, but for the customers that we work with, like it's really kind of a wide range. So there's some people that just set up their Shopify store. It's not their first rodeo. They're like, hey, we're going to run paid traffic to it. We don't have that much time, right? So like we, have our budget's relatively small. Like we just want to kind of try this out, and we're going to see how it does on a certain campaign. So that might just be a very targeted campaign. And we have experts that actually help people design landing pages from scratch. So we get a lot of merchants who are like, hey, like I heard we need landing pages, but like we don't really have a huge ad budget. Like I just want to get my feet wet and see how it goes. And for those types of merchants, it's like, that's perfectly fine. We'll pair you up with an expert. We help you design the landing page, and then you can get it built in Replo. And in that instance, it's just one landing page. But as the company grows, it's going to be like you as a founder, you're going to realize like, actually, like my product resonates not only with, stay-at-home moms, it also resonates with, people potentially in a different country or a different market or just a different background. And then the nice thing about Replo is that we actually see people start from one landing page and then kind of diverge from there, because you can literally just copy paste the designs from one landing page, change the content, change potentially, the images or videos that you're using, and adapt that landing page to a different segment of users. And then that's kind of like how things grow, right? Because then, as you become more successful, your ad budget's going to grow. You're going to grow out like a marketing team, and then they're going to want to experiment with different stuff. So that's kind of like, I think, how brands develop. And like, at the top end, like we have brands doing over $100 million a year. Like they have hundreds of different landing pages. So
yeah. I mean, I can see the application for both paid social and search is immense. So on the paid social side, it's kind of those persona targeted landing pages where the ad might have been targeting a certain segment and it's calling out that segment. So the landing page is kind of tailored to that segment. We have brands we work with, for instance, that, their product has a broad appeal, but you need to kind of explain to the different segments why it works for them.
Yeah.
And then on the Google side, it's obvious, like really keyword optimized landing pages, and then you can have multiple landing pages, but really targeted towards the keyword, and then use that to improve your quality score, which is really important. Okay, so taking a step back then, you've obviously got access to a lot of data about what kind of elements work on a landing page to get it to perform really well. How would you break down like the top kind of 3 to 5 things that a great landing page includes in order for it to like build the trust that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a few overarching things that like I see people doing wrong. So like maybe I can like kind of talk through some of those. Like I think one big thing is that like this sounds really basic, but I still see this happen a lot, which is like the page isn't really optimized for kind of the devices that people are using. So like if you're selling to, in a market where there's low connectivity and people's internet isn't that great, like, like probably don't include very large videos, right? If your traffic is coming through, mostly TikTok or like mobile devices, like make sure that your call to action button is like above the fold, and make sure that you're testing this like on all your devices. Like I think a lot of times like people are like, hey, like it works on like my iPhone 13 Plus Pro Max, right? And like, you have a huge screen, and then it's like actually when you look at the data, it's like most people are on Android or most people are on smaller phones, and like the button doesn't actually show up, and it's like something that takes like literally 1 second to fix, like on Replo or I mean like any of these tools. And like you just have to like make sure that is, it like the page looks nice, and then the page is optimized for your audience. And I think in a similar vein, it's like going kind of back to the storytelling analogy. It's like if we all have one of these friends that's like, hey, like they're telling a story and they're going in like 15 different directions, right? And you're like, at the end of it, you're like, wait, so like what was your point? Like what was the story, right? And I see that happen a lot with landing pages where people are like, hey, like we're gonna include like 5 different products on here, or we're gonna include like 15 different choices. And one of the things with landing pages is that ideally you're telling a personalized story to every single one of your users that's like personalized for them, right? So having like a very straightforward offer where you're like, okay, this offer is really good, it's too like you can't turn this down, right? Like, and just having that one offer there typically generally works better than, having a lot of different choices, because when people have a lot of choices, they're taking more time to think about it. They're going to leave and come back, and they're maybe not going to come back. So I think being focused and making sure that, everything kind of looks really, really good is I think the 2 easiest things where I'm like, okay, like this takes 5 seconds to fix, and everyone should do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So having that no-brainer offer is really important. So what are you typically advising a brand to have, say the landing pages for paid social, whether it's TikTok or Facebook?
Yeah.
Are you keeping the navigation there so that the visitor can click around the rest of the site, or are you leaving it like that kind of ClickFunnels style where it's, just the page and there's nowhere else to go but click the button?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. I mean, I think this is like kind of like another thing where probably I think the more important thing here is to have everything instrumented, right? Because when you run ads, you're spending a lot of money. Like like you mentioned, the space is getting increasingly competitive. Chances are the product that you're selling, there's like 15 other people selling the same product. Yeah. And like people are bidding on the same keyword. So you're spending a lot of money on these ads, and you want to make sure that at the end of the day, you're getting the ROI that you need. And so this kind of boils down to strategy, whether you have, the header there or you allow people to navigate off the site. But I think like for each campaign, just like testing it out, like, looking at the metrics, looking at how many people are coming through, looking at where people are going. And you can easily see this using a tool like Google Analytics. And if you see people, bouncing off, if you see people like leaving the site, like it probably doesn't matter that you have the navigation menu there. It's like people just aren't interested in your product or your offer. But then if people are like navigating to other parts of your site, it's like, okay, well, like maybe it's okay because you want them to learn more about the product. And if they eventually make the purchase, that's totally fine. And because Replo is integrated into your Shopify store, like you can track all of your metrics across both Replo pages and non-Replo pages. So it totally fits into your analytics platform. But if you see people navigating to other parts of your site, but they're still coming back and making the purchase, like maybe it doesn't really matter, right? So I think everyone should kind of go through and test this for themselves and for their brand rather than listening to something on Twitter and being like, oh, like I have to do this. It's like a golden rule for everyone, right? So
that's the classic thing, isn't it? Yeah.
It's definitely the easier thing to do, but I think it's worth testing it out for yourself.
Yeah. So who are some of the best players in the e-com space who are really using landing pages in creative and interesting ways? And what are they doing? What have you seen lately that's kind of got you excited?
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's a ton of interesting stuff that people are doing with influencers these days. So like we work with like Hexclad, for example, and they have a ton of like, I think Gordon Ramsay is one of their spokespeople. And like, I think like seeing, like, I think a lot of these products, it's really hard to sell as well, because like there's like so many companies kind of in every single space, right? It's like, the pots and pans space, but every other space. But really pairing people up with like, I think like people that they trust, I think is really nice, and like carrying that story, right? So from, somewhere on YouTube or somewhere on Instagram or TikTok or wherever, and you actually see someone that you trust using the product, and then lending that itself into a landing page where you actually see, that person using the product. And like, it's kind of like going back to that story metaphor, right? I think that's really, really interesting. It allows people to, because I think like the other issue with having landing pages where you're giving this offer or like a discount is that you have to give the discount, right? Which kind of cuts into your margins. So I think having kind of these proof of concept or like social proof where you're like, okay, this person that you maybe have heard of is using this product, and then kind of carrying that through the storytelling process. I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, interesting. So is that kind of like I saw an example yesterday that piqued my interest. It was kind of like a Ezra Firestone style, what he calls a pre-sale article, where it's like content based, it almost is like a news article. About something. And then from there you go through to a product page to buy. Is that the kind of thing you mean, or is it something different?
That could work as well. I was kind of thinking just like kind of a product page-esque landing page where you have a custom section for a particular like influencer or partner or like whatever you're working with, right? So, but I think like there's also kind of like I think because we're so used to like buying stuff online, like I think like little red flags go off in our brain every time we like see an ad, and then we click on the ad and there's like a spinner or something, or like there's like a flashing thing, and you're like, oh my god, this website trying to sell me on something, like I'm gonna like leave, right? Like and like I think a lot of these content plays, it's really interesting because like you are actually providing value to the user, like you're educating them on something. And like one thing that I saw recently that was really, really cool is that like I don't know if I would advise this for everyone, but this company was building like landing pages, but they were actually like like talking about their competitors or like, the benefits and pros and cons of their competitors and things like that. And then it's actually like kind of this interesting strategy where you're like almost in some ways promoting your competitors, but at the end, you're just like, oh wait, but actually like, here's a really great offer for this product. And it's actually kind of like this like weird way of selling people on your own product, but like actually talking about something entirely different. And I think this strategy, it works. Yeah. It works potentially. It might be a plus or minus, like, I don't know, but I think like it sells a product without making people feel like they're being sold. And I think that is the most important thing, right?
Yeah. I think that's it, isn't it? Like millennials, Gen Z, we are I'm on the cusp of millennial and Gen X, but we are, we're used to being sold to, and we're cynical, and we want to feel like, this brand is genuine, that they're not trying to hoodwink with me. And so the more you can make them feel like logically they are making this decision themselves based on information they're weighing up, rather than being kind of pushed into a corner to purchase something. At the end of the day, we are still using psychological tricks to sell to them. We're just being a little more elevated with the way that we're doing it.
You have to understand the game to play it, right? So one interesting thing I was reading the other day was that like, and I realized I do this as well, is like I actually put in, like before I'm buying a product or anything, I'll actually put in the product name into Google and I'll add Reddit at the end, because like I trust like random people's advice on the internet and not necessarily like, you know, if I search a product and I just end up on their product page, right? Like I want like random people on the internet to be like, hey, I actually bought this product and it was really, really good. So like kind of formatting these kind of pages where it feels like you're giving like authentic testimonials about the product, and like you should have authentic testimonials, you know, it's not necessarily, you know, you're kind of like playing the game. Like there's probably people out there that really love your product, and like actually putting that content on the page and actually showing people like, hey, like I don't need, you know, these random offers, or I don't need this like, you know, like influencer, like these are just normal people that bought our product and really, really loved it. And like, you know, just like people make it harder than it is, you know, it's like, which I think is interesting. So
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. At the end of the day, you're not going to be able to scale your ecom brand if your product is totally shit. Like there's going to be a point. So your product must be good enough. It must be pretty decent. And therefore there must be people that are happy with it. If there's not, then you really are going to have a huge marketing challenge to get over.
Yeah.
So then I think what a lot of brands kind of miss is like, there is all that good stuff hidden or spread across the internet or in different places, or they haven't asked for it. And it's actually pulling it all together in an easy to follow format so that this kind of modern consumer is saved the trouble of having to go looking for it, right?
Yeah. And that's also why we like have all of these templates, right? Because there are at the end of the day best practices, and there could be, you know, best practices of the season. It's like, you know, like there was a point in time, I mean, to some degree this still exists, where like user generated content was really, really important on these landing pages, right? I think now people are kind of moving into like a more educational, like kind of listicle format. And like, there's a certain expectation from consumers as well, because like, and this is kind of a recommendation I have for design of landing pages and e-commerce sites in general, is like people go after like this really like kind of fancy, like there's things flying off of the corner of the screen. And like, I'm just like, okay, that site looks really, really nice. You know, I'm sure you paid a lot for it. But when consumers go online and buy stuff, like they don't want shit flying from the left half of the screen. You know, there's a certain expectation that they have, which is like, here is a trustworthy e-commerce website where, you know, these people didn't spend $1 billion on marketing and actually spent $1 billion on their product. Like, no, there's a lot of dominant design theory that goes into it. So I think like by having some of the templates that we have on Replo, like it's really kind of giving best practices to people without, you know, having them do all this testing and like, you know, kind of going in circles about like what works best for them, right? Like we want, like by industry, by, you know, by price point, by category, like we have templates that work for people. And a lot of times people take those and they just double their conversion rate and they're like, wait, this is amazing. And I'm like, yeah, it's really not as hard as it seems. So
yeah, I mean, starting from a base of like, this definitely works for other brands is a good place to start, right?
And they've spent the money testing it. So it's like, why not take it, right? Like, you know, there's people have done the research, they've spent money on it, and you know, like that's money you don't have to spend now testing. So
and that's the thing. I think one of the first books about like usability I read was I think it was called Don't Make Me Think, and it was the whole premise of it was like, you know, if people are having to figure out your website and try and understand it, they're just not going to. They don't, as humans, we want to avoid taxing our brain too much. So if things are laid out so differently that they don't know where to go, then you've lost 90% of people right then and there.
Yeah. People are super, super lazy, and that is like actually works out in your favor.
Yeah. Cool. So we've talked a bit about landing pages specifically. What else, do you have any other thoughts to share with the audience about, you know, kind of what are the design trends or principles that are working well in e-com, or other kind of more high level conversion rate optimization tips?
I don't know. There's one thing I've kind of seen is like a lot of people don't include pictures of their product or like someone using their product. Right. And I think that's something where like, especially in like skincare or like, you know, like CPG, like a lot of times it's like you'll have, you know, like a cream or like some sort of like thing that you have to use. And it's super clear. Like when I talk to the founders, they're like, oh yeah, this is how you use it. It's like amazing. Like we've done all this research on it. Like we spent all this money, and they're like spending like tens of thousands of dollars on these ads. And I'm like, I just see like your product, but I don't know how to use it. It's like, there's no like user education in it. Right. And like, or sometimes like you go on someone's website and there's just like there's stock photos there. And like, I'm like, okay, well, there's stock photos of your, like, it just doesn't connect. It's like, because again, people are lazy, right? Like people want to be put into like this imaginary someone else's shoes of like using the product and getting excited about the product. So like always showing the picture of the product and like someone actually using it is super, super important. And like, I think a lot of people take advice from, like someone and they're like, hey, like we need landing pages, or we need, someone to go take photography of our product, or we need like, UGC or whatever. And it's like, I think like thinking, not just taking the advice like upfront and actually thinking about it holistically, kind of like the story part where it's like, not only do you need a highly converting landing page, where the button is above the fold, then the page has to load fast, but you need to actually educate the user on how to use your product, right? So there's a lot of those things. I think also like, again, I just can't stress like how important like analytics is. And like, there's a lot of like really cheap tools out there where you have like heat maps, and you have like even something like Full Story where you can actually see how people are interacting with your website. I think that's something that even at Replo, like we watch people use the editor all the time, and we're like, oh my God, like this is like, we thought this was super straightforward, but it's actually really, really confusing, right? And when people see these products, they're like, oh my God, it costs like $500 a month or $1,000 a month. But if you think about it from the perspective of like, if you actually take the actionable advice that they give you and actually make that change, like that could be a like 2x like increase on your conversion. And if you're spending like $100,000 on ads every month, like a 2x conversion is like insane. Like it pays back for every single piece of software you'll spend money on and more, right? So
yeah,
I think like those are like, I think people kind of think about like, okay, like this is the cost I'm spending up front, but I'm also kind of like, okay, but think about like how good your conversion rate could be. And if it's not improving, it's like, yeah, you should definitely absolutely cancel, whatever you're paying for. But yeah,
I think it's almost like there's the two ends of the spectrum, right? There's the brands that don't have enough data, and they're like all obsessed with the data and the tools, and it's like
that's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
And then you have the ones that have a ton of data, and they're still kind of stressing about the cost of some tool rather than the impact that investment is going to have.
Yeah.
And I've seen brands that are doing, multiple millions in a quarter. Resist getting Klaviyo because it's going to cost, because of their list size, it's going to cost them, $800. And I'm like, the ROI is like the data on Klaviyo is the ROI is there. Like when you're doing that many, you have that much data going through your system, it's going to improve your performance. So yeah, it's always interesting to me, different founders, what they get stuck on or what holds them back. And we can see it a bit more clearly sometimes from the outside.
Yeah. I think the best thing is to like focus on what you need the tool to do and not necessarily on the tool itself. Because like once you get on a sales call with someone and they're going to pitch you, and they're going to pitch you hard on using that tool. And like, even for us, like, and this is probably working against our interest too, but like when we hop on a call with a merchant, like my first question is always like, hey, like, what are your goals for this year? Like, what are you trying to get out of this business? And like a lot of times, like Replo might not be the right tool for them. It's like, if they're not doing paid social or like paid marketing, or like they're not building landing pages, like Replo might not be a good tool for them. And like, it's actually a waste of everyone's time to like even try to like close that deal and be like, hey, you should use Replo, totally. Right? Like, so I think when people are kind of going to Klaviyo and they're like, hey, like we have to pay $1,000 a month or $800 a month, it's like, yeah, if you're just thinking about it from the perspective of like paying $800 a month, it's like, yeah, it's definitely not worth it, but if you think about it from the perspective of like, hey, like we're going to drive this much new traffic to our website because we're, consistently sending out these email campaigns, then it's like a no-brainer. And what I like to say even to our team is like, software becomes very expensive, especially recurring software, right? But I think that the best tool is the one used the most often. So if you have a plan to use the tool, then, and you're getting value from it, then it's like, it absolutely makes a lot of sense. So
yeah, totally. Cool. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience from, insights from your space or anything else?
Not really. I mean, like, I think for, from the perspective of landing pages, I think it's just like the most important thing is to just kind of get started and see for yourself whether it helps the business. Right. And I think like we've brought a ton of businesses value. We've brought, people who've never even kind of built landing pages before, one of the things that we're doing is like, we're not just building the software, but we're also building kind of the ecosystem around the software. So we have a Slack community now that's over 1,200 people. And I think like we're over 1,000 people joined like literally in the last 3 months. So it's like, it's going super, super quickly. And like, I think for us, like, we just want to help merchants and we want to help people. And like, so we have like all of these experts that will help you design the landing pages and like help you launch the landing pages. And it's like, maybe not the, sexiest thing that like, investors are thinking about when they're thinking about margins. But for us, it's super, super important because at the end of the day, like, we want to make sure that merchants are getting value from our software and from our business. And if we're not, then like we shouldn't exist, right? So we have all this stuff that helps merchants get landing pages off the ground, not just the software, but also the community, the experts.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like if people want to learn more, Replo.app is where to go.
Cool. Yeah, we'll link that in the show notes. Make sure people can find you. But that's awesome. Thanks for coming along. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
No worries. Thanks so much for joining us here on the E-commerce Impact Podcast. If I can ask you one favor, can you please make sure you subscribe? And if you can, leave us a review. It helps us have a much bigger impact with what we're trying to do here at the E-commerce Impact Podcast. Now, if you're ready to take your e-com store to the next level, then go to www.ecommerceimpactpodcast.com and click on the button to book a strategy call with me or my team. We offer a free order of your advertising and a custom growth plan, so you really have nothing to lose by getting in touch and jumping on a call with us. See you soon, and watch out for the next episode in 2 weeks' time.